Have you ever thought, is this just me when struggling to stay organized, start tasks, or manage time? For those of us over 50, these challenges might not be just aging. They could be ADHD hiding in plain sight for decades. I'm Jamie Shapiro, host of Grandma Has ADHD, and I'm building a community where your experiences matter. Whether you're diagnosed, questioning, or simply curious, you're not alone. Our Facebook group is filled with vibrant, understanding people over 50 who share their stories, strategies, and yes, even their struggles, with plenty of laughter along the way. Ready to find your people? Join our growing Grandma Has ADHD Facebook community. Please like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen, and share it with someone who might need to hear they're not alone, because ADHD doesn't have an age limit, and neither does understanding yourself better. Together, we're changing the conversation about ADHD after 50. Come be part of the story. Hi, and welcome to the latest edition of Grandma Has ADHD. I am excited to have a conversation with someone that I have never met. Very often when I do these podcast interviews, I've had some interaction, but I'm finding that I'm really liking the spontaneity of getting to know a guest the way that you would. So I'm going to read her bio and then bring her onto our stage. So Kara Cruz is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's got a lot of letters behind her name. So I'm going to let her talk a little bit about what she does, because I know I get overwhelmed when I hear all of those letters. But she is in private practice and a clinical supervisor of a women's mental health advocate and educator who was also diagnosed with ADHD in adulthood, which I love when my guests combine, they get it and they also treat it. So that's amazing. Her area of focus in her work as a therapist is reproductive mental health, ADHD, complex trauma, mood and anxiety conditions, and in addition to psychotherapy with individuals and couples. She also facilitates mental health training and continuing education for professionals focused on the above-mentioned mental health topics. Kara leads workshops and wellness groups for women and is also the co-founder of Women's Support Circle, a community for women offering monthly, no-cost support circles, workshops, and a safe space for women to gather in community. That sounds so ADHD also. Kara is also a baseball and music mom to her 11-year-old son, Clark. Away from work, she enjoys spending time in nature, especially near the coast of California, with her son and husband. She's also a dog mom to fur babies Kobe and Willow. And you can find Kara at her website, karacruz.com. That's KARACRUZ.com. We're going to put that in the show notes and probably mention it again at the end. You got to remember, though, we've got to remind me, Kara, because you know how those memories go. And you can find her on Instagram at Kara Cruz Wellness and Women's Support Circle. Did I get all of that right?
You got it. I know it's a lot. And your comment about that sounds very ADHD. It's absolutely true. So many ideas and not enough time to implement them all, right?
You know what? I will say that the best part of doing this podcast is interviewing the amazing people that we are in good company with and the accomplishments. So for all of the shame that goes with having ADHD, I'm reading these bios and I'm like, I don't think the average person has the energy to accomplish what those of us with ADHD can accomplish when we want to do something. So given that, is there anything that I didn't include in your bio that you want to make sure that our listeners hear?
No.
I'm assuming based on looking at you that you are not a grandma.
No, I'm not a grandma. I'm a mom.
Okay. I figured with an 11-year-old. Go ahead.
The grandma tie-in for me, and not to interrupt you, of course, but it's just after getting diagnosed myself, there was a lot of wondering about grandmothers in my family line who may have been diagnosed. They're not here anymore, but I look at some of the characteristics and traits and memories I have, and I think, I wonder if that's what was going on.
Yeah, I would love to explore that with you, and also how that impacts trauma. And I want to definitely talk to you about trauma. And a lot of times people say that a lot of trauma can mimic ADHD. So there's a lot that we're going to unpack in this episode. But I always like to start with the origin story. My favorite part of listening to other podcasts about ADHD is hearing other people share how they got to this. Take the stage.
Yeah, I'm like, "Oh, where do I begin?" And yeah, and you know how this goes with our brains, right? You can go a million different ways, but
Mhm.
long story short, I think I went through my life always knowing that there was something going on, that my brain worked differently, but the story I told myself was that I was lazy, I was motivated. I
Mm.
had this idea that I was smart because I remember being told that. I remember when I would try to
Mm.
do something, I could be successful, but it was always with follow through. It was always with the steam running out, not finishing things, feeling like things weren't too hard, but it wasn't that the concepts were hard, but it was just getting it done was hard. And but I didn't know what that meant. I just told myself like there's something wrong with me. I'm lazy, I'm unmotivated or whatever. And just that was the pattern all through school. Going through school, I missed a lot of school. I had a lot of attendance issues. I changed schools.
Mhm.
I think I went to a different school every school year. One of my husband and I, we had this goal with our son that our goal is that he's gonna go to the same elementary school from K to 6. He said, "We almost made it.
Yeah.
We're almost there." But school for me, there were parts of it that I liked and parts of it that I didn't like. So there was just always this kind of ongoing throughout my life. I can remember reading a report card where the teacher said that I daydream a lot. And I remember exactly how it was written. It said, Kara daydreams, and she wrote a lot, like in bold, little yelling letters. And
Mhm.
I remember teachers saying that you just don't apply yourself, or when you do apply yourself, you do really well. But there was always just this but.
I have a
And
question for you. Can I? All right. I know you're playing with fire when you interrupt someone with ADHD with a thought,
that's
but
okay.
did you change schools a lot, maybe because of social anxiety? And I ask you that question because my oldest child was not diagnosed until 13. And I moved my child's school almost every year because I kept thinking that the problem was all the other kids. And I didn't make the connection. We didn't know that they had ADHD till 13.
Yeah, I think part of it was just moving. That was a
Okay.
part of it. But as I got older, when I got older, like junior high school, when you move closer to like, your peers, your peer groups being a big influence, I think that was definitely played a role in it. But as I got older, I did have this need to want to settle in and stay at the same school. So as I got into junior high, I think I went to two, one in seventh, one in eighth, and then high school for the most part, that stayed the same.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
elementary school was just all over the place, which then in turn that impacted not having those lifelong friendships. When you go to school
Mhm.
and peers that they've been friends since kindergarten and the parents all
Mhm.
know each other. I didn't have that sense of long-standing community. So that connection piece was missing. So it just all the way around really just impacted.
Do you think that you moved because of your parents, maybe one of them having ADHD and needing change? Because I know for me, I moved a lot when my kids were young because I was always like looking for the next thing.
Yeah, I think part of it had to do with because I was raised by my grandmother for the most part, and
Oh,
she stayed at the same job, but we moved a lot. So I think it would be things like rent was going up and or this place is bigger, this is better. Yeah, bigger, better, something's
that sounds
different.
like me. Yeah.
Yeah, she ended up buying a house when I went into 8th grade, and that really is when I started to feel a little bit more stable in my life, was going to
Mhm.
school. I had a group of friends from, like, later elementary that I stayed friends with the last elementary I went to, and so we ended up staying at that house. My family
Okay.
still my uncle still owns the house, so
Oh,
that did help. That
really?
definitely yeah.
Sure. So tell me how you ended up getting diagnosed. I always like to hear
Oh,
that. 'Cause
yeah, I knew I always wanted to be a therapist at some level, and I think that when I explored it initially when I was a sophomore in high school, I signed up for this it was an elective class called Peer Facilitators, but it hadn't been
Mm.
really developed. It was like a new thing. So I signed up for it with this really thinking this is going to be so cool. I'm going to get to be like a peer support counselor type of person with other students. And then really the wasn't developed. The school hadn't fully developed it. So we did a lot of it was like a free period where we did our homework and hung out, which wasn't a bad thing for somebody with ADHD who was also very busy having a slow class. But I knew I wanted
Mhm.
to do that. But then as I got older, I also really knew that I wanted to have financial stability. I wanted to be able to not have financial struggles like my family did. And so part of it, think going into therapy, I wasn't really sure, can I make a living? What's that going to be like? And so I detoured and explored a million other things, changed my major a
Mhm.
million times. And
Mhm.
long story short is when I was in my 20s and 30s, came back around to what I loved, which is I love psychology. I loved learning about that field and eventually went down the route, got jobs working in schools and with kids and group homes. And then took me a while, but when my son was born, when I was on maternity leave, that was actually the thing that kind of gave me some space to complete those applications for grad school because it was like I never had time. I was always feeling burnout. I was really busy. Couldn't get the executive functioning down to know where to start. It was like too many steps. And then when I was at
Right.
home on maternity leave, I had a little bit of mental space and I did that. So that took me to where I'm at today in terms of being a therapist. I just knew I wanted to do that. And anyway, I don't think I answered your question,
You
but
didn't, but it's interesting that you brought up, you said that you had the space to do it when you had a child, and when you think about a typical person, when they've had a child, like, that's consuming, that you're not sleeping, you're wrapped around this baby, and the fact that you had the energy to take that on highlights ADHD so much because I find the more we have to do, the more we get done. And okay, yes, you didn't answer your story. So how did you make the connection that you actually had ADHD?
and going through grad school and becoming a therapist myself, learning, and I think that's part of what drove me to wanting to be a therapist was I wanted to figure myself out. Like, why do I do
Mhm,
the things I do? Why do I not do the things I do? And as I was learning about ADHD and mood conditions, anxiety, things like that, the ADHD thing just really felt when I would look at anxiety or depression, like, yes, we've all gone through periods of anxiety and depression, but the thing that felt like that's me, like that's my personality, that's my core was the ADHD when we were learning about that. And when I saw it in real life, when I read the symptoms, it was like, oh, I hit all the markers for that. So I sat with me and thought, that's interesting. And just went about my business. And then once I started my own therapy, I started exploring that with therapists. And I had a few different therapists. One I don't think saw the connection because she couldn't believe you're too high functioning. You went through grad school, you work full time, you have a son. There's no way you can have ADHD. Or then I thought, is it bipolar disorder? Because it
mhm,
can look like a manic episode. But I'm like, that's
mhm,
fault setting, talkative. I'm have the same
mhm,
energy most of the time unless I'm burnt out. Looks like depression, so you can see where a lot of
mhm.
my disorder. But when I really took time, I brought it up to a couple different therapists, and I began seeing a somatic-based therapist who did more of the body work, addressed complex trauma, and really tried to sort out what feels like it's situational to your life, what feels like it's ingrained and that's who you are. And that's just when it clicked. And a therapist I was working with was the one who actually said, let's just go with that. Let's assume that this is what it is. Maybe there's a little bit of the trauma in there too, but it looks more like ADHD. I don't think it's bipolar disorder. I'm pretty sure it's not. And when I started just, let's jump in that pool and just pretend like it's that and go with it. And when I started addressing it in that way, things started to feel better.
Wow. Okay. I want to share a little nugget with you, but I also want to go back to trauma. So, the first thing I'm going to do is share a little nugget with you that I learned as a result of this podcast that I felt like it encapsulated the ADHD experience so much. I was with Wilma Fellman and we were talking about the term squirtle. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but I mean, I'm sure you've heard the term squirrel because we always assume like ADHD is such a squirrel. Oh, squirrel, squirrel. She actually said way before Pokemon, she came up with the term Squirtle because she said she is part squirrel, jump from thing to thing to thing, to turtle, which is then I need to retreat. And I never understood until she articulated that I am that person. I'm like, I go and then I hit my wall. So you can see
Yeah.
where that would be manic and then depressed. And I've gone full throttle and then I just, whew, I got to pull back. So
Yeah.
I wanted to share that because I just really like that. And then you're the first person so far that I have had who talks about trauma. And I have heard that a lot of symptoms of trauma can mimic ADHD. So I would love to explore that topic with you if we can.
Yeah, when you're looking at trauma, it can look different from person to person. Some people shut down more, some people go into a fight response more, some go into an activated, like a flight response. We're all a little bit
Mhm,
different depending on our nervous systems. And it can be really hard to really pinpoint what's going on. Your personality
mhm,
is impacted by it depending on when the trauma happened. Sometimes it's really obvious trauma, like one big event that was traumatic. And with complex trauma, it can be a lot of little things over time or disconnect
mhm,
time or lack of over time. And so it's really hard to pinpoint. So when I'm looking at working with somebody to determine if is it ADHD or trauma, it's hard because especially if it's childhood or developmental trauma, ADHD starts it's something you have. It's not something that all of a
mhm,
sudden as a 20-year-old I have ADHD all of a sudden.
mhm.
You've had it through it's a childhood developmental, I don't say disorder, condition. And then
Right.
trauma, complex trauma is in childhood too. So if you go back and try to when did it start? It feels like it started elementary school tends to be because that's when, you're in school, you're more structured, you have to follow more rules, and you get to see where when there's executive functioning issues and learning. And so basically you can have if you look at the big book of diagnostic disorders, you have a list of trauma symptoms and a list of ADHD symptoms, and they're just called different things, but they can look
Mhm.
exactly the same. So, you can have the little boy that says has trouble staying in their seat, which, is always on the go with, which is an ADHD symptom, or are they hypervigilant? They want to
Mhm.
escape the situation completely because
Right.
they feel unsafe. This you can have two little boys, two little girls, whoever doing the exact same behavior, but they're coming from a different place.
Yeah, and I wanna introduce also that when you grow up with ADHD, you do have that negative, and you even talked about it yourself, like how you spoke to yourself. So when you're getting bombarded with like, "Why can't you sit still? Why can't you get it together? Why are you lazy?" That's a trauma in and
Mhm.
of itself, am I right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I have my earliest memory is in a really close family friend. She's the first time I met you. I remember you were like jumping off of the furniture onto the coffee table and back and forth, like
Mhm,
literally jumping off the furniture. At, I don't know,
mhm,
3 or 4 years old. And I remember that. I have a memory of that. I
mhm.
got in really big trouble after that
Yeah.
guest house.
Oh.
And I have memories of being in class and just daydreaming and being very understimulated and bored and zoning out and not knowing what was going on and getting called on and getting embarrassed. And then it just all of that just compounds and builds, and then you're dealing with a lot of different things all at once because nobody
Yeah.
really said this is maybe some ADHD stuff going on because we just think you're just being naughty and not paying attention and focused.
Right. I absolutely grew up constantly being punished. And now, I look back, I remember my stepmother, this is probably a very familiar thing for people with ADHD, needs improvement, under talks too much in class. And she had me write sentence after sentence, I will not talk too much in class. I will not, like, just locked me in my room and had me. And that was a minor punishment compared to some of the things that I had to deal with that ex stepmother.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a lot of I'm a bad person or around that. So,
Yeah, it's a lot of I'm lazy or like with friends, you feel flaky because
mhm,
sometimes you do burn out and then you want
mhm,
to, and then you make plans when you're in your energetic self and you're like talkative and connected, and then you're doing too much and then you get tired. And you're like, oh, I'm in shutdown now, which those can be look like trauma responses too. You're
sure.
on, being off, and you want
Sure.
to treat, or you just don't not good at maybe messaging people back. Back then, it wasn't really messaging, but calling people back or showing up to something, and so you look like a flaky friend. If like you're spacing out and someone's talking, it's not that you're not smart and you don't have the mental capacity. It's just you're like, you went somewhere else because you were like, something else was more interesting in the moment.
Do you know, speaking of spacing out, I can remember before I was diagnosed sitting with my kids at the table and I would like literally just start to stare into space and they'd be like, "Mom." And now I remember and I still will zone out. So, what would you say to a keeping in mind that the audience that I have is I'm calling a senior 50 and over, even though that's not technically, because 50 is the average age that someone would become a grandparent. I am 55. And so I feel like we were the generation of people who were not diagnosed, and especially people older than me didn't have, at least I had a child that was diagnosed for me to turn around and ask the psychiatrist, "Hey, do I have it too?" What would you as a therapist say to somebody who is just realizing they're putting the pieces together and they are realizing they have ADHD? But before you answer, we're going to take a break. I'm going to leave everybody with the cliffhanger. And I am going to encourage you, if you are enjoying this episode or you enjoying Grandma Has ADHD, to like it, subscribe to it, make a comment, and share it with people that you think will benefit from it. And then, of course, I am building the Grandma Has ADHD Facebook community. And I think Kara is going to help nail this one at home, that we with ADHD love community. We love to know that we are not alone. And when you connect with other people who share your brilliant brain, you will realize that there is nothing wrong with you. We're just wired differently. So we're going to take a pause and come right back. And Kara is going to answer that question. Okay. Ever wondered why helping a loved one declutter feels like speaking different languages? I did, especially with my mom. It wasn't until I founded Silver Linings Transitions, helping San Diego seniors organize and move for over a decade, that I discovered why. We all experience clutter differently. And for those of us with ADHD, it's a whole other world. If you are listening in the San Diego area and feeling stuck with moving, paperwork, photos, or home organization, our team at Silver Linings Transitions gets it. We understand ADHD's unique challenges, and we won't just help you get organized, we'll create sustainable systems that finally stick. Schedule a consultation with our team today at 760-522-1624. That's 760-522-1624, or find us at silverliningstransitions.com. We are back, and during the break, I did ask Kara if she would be comfortable with me asking how it was that she came to live with her grandmother and a little bit more about her being raised by her grandmother, which she said that we could discuss. I never want to catch someone so off guard that it's just don't go there. But before we do that, the question that I left you with was, okay, I am a 65-year-old woman. I have just discovered that I have ADHD. It doesn't have to be I was diagnosed. It could be that I'm putting the pieces together. I realize that my grandchild has it. Now my child is saying they have it, and it's okay if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, might be a duck. So, Kara, what would you say to a patient or a client that came in and is just now putting all of this together? And they're likely feeling both grief and relief.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say that's where I would start I would start with what does this mean for you? That's where we would start because one
Mhm.
person might really want to figure out if there is a diagnosis and go that route. One person might really be sitting in grief of some sort of I wish I had known, while another person
Mhm.
might be like, oh goodness, I'm feeling so relieved. Well, now where do we go from here? And so I would really
Mhm.
just find out what what this means for them and where they want to focus because there's a lot of different layers and what direction we would go in terms of therapy if I was working with them one on one. I mean, it can go a million different ways, but my guess is there would be some grief work we'd be working with. There would be the relief and what this means now and how we're going to structure their life going forward so that it works for them and not against them. That's where I would start.
Right. I've had people say to me, this is a big why for my podcast is why does it matter? And I'm going to ask you a question. Is it there? Her eyes just bugged out. But do you think that you're 75, 80 years old and you just stop growing and stop wanting to improve your life?
Absolutely not. Why does it
Exactly.
matter? I mean, and why does it matter? Some people say, why do you need the why? Because it's validation that there's not something wrong with me, that this is just how my
Mhm.
brain works. And when I see is when people start to actually, I call it like breaking free from the matrix of I don't have to kind of conform and live like all the neurotypical people live because my brain works different and I can live the way and act the way that works for my brain and it might look different for someone else and that's actually okay. And it's okay for them to live the way they live too. It's not a criticism, but it's I can do things that work for me and listen to my
Mhm.
body. Big part of it is listening. It's not always about now what do we do? How do we fix it? It's not that because some people will want to explore medications with a psychiatrist and that's fine or other things, but it's tuning into their body and listening to their body because their nervous system's going to give them some really big cues on when their battery's running out, when they're feeling overwhelmed, when they're wanting to excited and want to interrupt somebody, all the things that kind of get them in trouble with their
Mhm.
ADHD, listening and tuning into their body and reconnecting to their body, something they've learned to probably shut off and shut down over the course of their years, especially somebody in their 80s, 70s. It's getting back into their body and reconnecting. And there's nothing wrong with you. And you have all the answers in you.
So that's a great way to go with this. How do you give me some examples of getting into your body or what your body, because I know the other thing that I noticed with ADHD is we're running on a motor, we're go, and we don't often slow down. Age may cause a little slowdown, but like I have an 80-year-old father who could probably run circles around me still 80. By the way, my mom and dad both have ADHD. So I get one parent has hyperactive and parent has inattentive, and I got both.
But you
Anyway,
right.
but
Yeah.
I am combined.
Yeah.
So how does that feel? What would you say? How does it feel? What can someone look for in their bodies?
And it's something that I'm very careful with everybody I work with, especially looking into, I want to know their history because if there's a significant trauma history, the body has shut some of these things down as a means to protect them. And we don't want to
Mhm.
flood the nervous system. We don't want to re traumatize a person. But really, it's just really slowing down and noticing. So, in session, a lot of us with ADHD are really in our heads and we're talkers. We started with a lot of the traditional talk therapy, and a part of us really likes that because we get to just free flow, say whatever we want. We don't have to filter. We have a lot to say, but the
Mhm.
hardest thing for me so what I started with was somatic experiencing therapy. So my therapist was trained in somatic experiencing and it was really slowing down. It was talking less. And that was hard for me. It was like, okay, this is very boring. What are we doing? This feels like a waste of time. But in a very short time, I was out of session and very much like catching sensation in my body. So it would be a tightness in my chest. It would be clenching my jaw. It would be the first thing that actually my husband pointed out to me, I was really frustrated one day at a situation happening, and I am not like a dramatic person, but I was feeling like, I was like, I'm feeling dizzy and I'm feeling, you're not breathing. Noticing that I'm really, my shoulders are up here a lot. I'm holding my breath a lot when I'm activated. That was a big cue for me of noticing what my nervous system wants to do, what my body tends to do when I'm on in that fight flight, whether it's from my ADHD brain or from just being activated in a very busy type of lifestyle, really tuning into that and knowing how to just settle a little bit and check in with
Mhm.
it. And then over time, I would notice patterns, that when this situation happens, I feel a tightness in my chest. When that situation happens, I get very tingly in my body. So it's
Mm.
teaching. We teach our kids in therapy, kids learn emotions. They learn all the different, they give little vocabulary lists. And each week we add some new words so they can learn how to identify emotions, not just the four: happy, sad, angry, fearful, but we teach them more. We do the same thing with somatic, is we teach the sensation in the body. So there's a whole set of vocabulary about sensation in the body. And for somebody with ADHD or trauma, that's where we start, is we try to reconnect to the body in a safe way, slowly, safely, and listen to the cues that our body is giving us.
So I would love it if you would define somatic work just in case there's somebody who hasn't heard that term before.
Soma
Um,
is of the body. So somatic experiencing would be experiencing through the body. When we talk about the body, it's really tuning into getting out of our heads for a bit. Just to break it down in simple terms, is getting out of your head, checking in with the body and see what's happening in your body in any
okay,
given situation.
that's
So
super.
talking
I,
less, feeling, experiencing more.
I love that. And I also heard, and you're a therapist, so I can ask that usually if you allow an emotion to pass through you, if you just allow yourself to feel it, because we don't want to feel those emotions, but that if we really will sit in that emotion, that it takes about a minute and a half for it to pass through us. Is that true?
What happens is we learn tools to override our emotions. So we're feeling anxious and we learn it. What's a tool that we can think differently to avoid? So it's an avoidance of an emotion. So we're not
Mhm.
experienced. And those are helpful. They're helpful when we're in a situation. If you're at work and you have to function and get through your day, you may not have time to slow down and feel what's in your body, especially if it's a really big emotion. It might take you down, or it might bring some tears, or there might be some big emotions that come up with that. And so there's a time and a place for it. But a lot of traditional talk therapies, not all of them, but a lot of them are really teaching like how to override, how to avoid what's a coping skill to get you out of that emotion. So when you're feeling something, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling anxious, let's do something else to distract from it. When I'm working with people with addiction, and this sometimes can be life saving when they're trying to just get their head above water. So I'm not saying these are bad things, but when somebody's dealing with addiction and they're having like a trigger or a craving, it's, let's do something else. Let's do something with a friend, do something more enjoyable to get out of that feeling so that we don't have the craving, or we don't want to numb it with something. And so when we're doing the somatic work, we're actually staying with it so that we're able to sit with it and let it. But sometimes it takes longer than others. Sometimes one emotion that we've never really experienced, like anger for some people, can take a period of time to really comfortable with, but to notice that this is okay. There's not a bad emotion. There's
Mhm.
different parts of ourselves and none of them are bad, but we are taught that certain emotions and certain parts of us are bad.
For sure. That was a very helpful explanation. Okay. So, one of the things that I like to ask people, I know that there's this expression toxic positivity when it comes to ADHD, and there are a lot of people who when I ask the question, and I want to ask you this question too, if you could have been born without ADHD, would you choose that?
No, not now.
Right.
Maybe if I knew what it was, I would say I don't want this part of me anymore. I don't want this distracted part or this hyper. But now I can't imagine it because it's got me to where I'm at. It's almost like
Mhm.
when you've gone through really hard times and you have the wisdom that you have
Mhm.
behind it, probably because you're like, oh, I wish I didn't experience that, but I wouldn't trade it for the wisdom I have now from it.
Yeah, that's almost the universal answer, by the way, that I get. And it is once you've gone this far and you've learned to live with it, then you channel it. I bring it up a lot, but I love Ned Hallowell's expression that ADHD is like having a Ferrari brain and bicycle brakes. Um, I mean,
Yeah.
we have this like amazing brain, and it's just being able to direct it in what interests us and then try to outsource what we find boring if that's at all possible. So,
Mhm.
what would you say is your ADHD superpower? Because I just said,
I love my hyper focus. My hyper focus has gotten me through grad school. It gets things done, but it's in battle with my procrastination too, right? But that hyper focused part of me when I'm in feeling like I'm in that flow. And I know now because of learning through my body that could actually quickly lead me to burnout. So I really have to do check-ins and breaks and go get water, take a bathroom break, go eat something. It sounds really silly, but if I don't take care of myself and hyper focus, I can get really close to burnout, even when I'm doing something I really enjoy and love. And then it can quickly turn into what it looks like that depressed state, but that shut where you want to space out and doom scroll and binge watch Netflix, eat a lot of sugar. I have to listen to, is this still hyper focus, which feels very flowy, feels very energetic. And there's a certain point I get to with ADHD brain. It, like, we don't really have like a, well, I'm getting tired and worn out. It's like, I'm done. It's real quick. So
It's right.
boundary.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I've hit my wall. When I was pregnant with my first child, I can remember I was working as a realtor, and I remember when I would go out and tour with clients, I would forget to eat. And I was pregnant, and my ex-husband, and because I was enjoying what I was doing and I was so in that moment. What I have now learned is that when we do hyper focus, we're giving so much more than the average person. We're getting so much more done that we do have to allow ourselves that break. Cause I always feel guilty. I don't know about you, but if I'm not productive, there's this, I'm not maximizing my time. And I am working on getting better about allowing myself, okay, you just exceeded anybody's expectations or what any, and now it's okay for you to retreat and be that turtle. I
Yeah.
actually experienced for the first time, and my oldest child who has ADHD, and ADHD exists on a spectrum, just like trauma exists on a spectrum. And you meet one person with ADHD and you meet one person with ADHD. But I remember it was actually recently that I had my first, I'm flooded. I don't even know where to go, where to begin. Like, I really had an executive functioning, like, I wasn't doing it. And I called my child and I was like, I think I'm getting this now. I think I'm understanding. What would be the one thing that would, you love your hyper focus? What would you like ditch if you could just ditch what you wanted to?
Oh, that's hard. I wanted to mention, and maybe this is one of those, that's why I wanted to mention is sometimes I know for people, we get into hyper focus when we're doing something we really enjoy or gives us lots of reward. But sometimes that hyper focus doesn't show up in things like if we're doing a job at work that we don't like, and we can seem like we're a really crappy employee or we're not doing a good job. And
Mhm,
so it's almost like you have two people. You see
mhm,
sides of the person. And so I've had jobs where there's certain parts of my job that I love and I stay in the flow state. Like when I worked at a community mental health agency, I loved getting up and training. I loved talking to the staff when I was a supervisor, but when I would have to check reports and I'd have to write out evaluations and I'd have to do things like checking 8-page treatment plans and like checking for errors, it was like I would hit a wall and I could not get through that. I felt like
mhm,
a failure in the world, that I just was not smart, that I was getting it. And I know now it's because there was no reward in that. And there was a lot of interruption. When I would get into a focused state, there'd be a lot of phone calls coming in, people needing me, and I would get very frustrated. So my frustration, I think that's part of me that sometimes I wish I could get rid of, that I get impatient or I get frustrated or I don't like to be interrupted when I'm in that flow.
mhm.
But
Right.
now that I'm getting to know it better, it actually isn't a part of me that I would get rid of, because now I know it and I know what it needs. And that's a problem with me not setting boundaries with other people and saying, "Hey, I'm
Mhm.
working on something right now," because it seems rude, right? And we're taught like, "Don't do that. Be available." No, like, actually
Right.
listening to yourself would mean I need a block of 2 hours of time to work on these reports or whatever, and I need to turn my phone on D, and I need to not be interrupted, and I'm going to get this done if I'm able to do that, take care of myself. And so I think getting to know that part of myself and seeing what does it need versus let's get rid of it, that's where I'm at with it.
That's awesome. And I know that we with ADHD tend to be people pleasers, again, because there have been so many negative messages that we aren't always really good about the boundaries. And that's another one that I'm learning about in my ADHD coaching. Okay, if people want to find you, if somebody's listening to this and they are like, I really resonated with Kara, I want to work with her. Who do you work with? How do you see patients? And then I want to talk a little bit about your women's support circle.
Yeah. For therapy, I'm licensed in California, so I can work individually. I mostly work with women, but I do work with some couples and I do have men on my caseload. Usually I don't market so much to that if it's the right fit and they talk to me and we feel like it's a good fit, like I have a couple men and couples I'm working with. And I also have my signature women's group that's called It Begins With Us. And it's really about self connection, reconnecting to the authentic version of self. And so those are my therapy, professional therapy based services for California residents only. And then I have a therapist facing side of my business, which is open to all therapists. I do training, so continuing education on the same topics. And so, where to find me? My website, everything is housed there, or on Instagram. I constantly updating and posting what I have going on. So if they follow me at Kara Cruz Wellness on Instagram or my website, they'll know what's going on with me. And yeah, and then you wanted to talk about Women's Support Circle.
Sure. Yeah. I want to just mention again, in case you are just listening to this, Kara Cruz is KARACRUZ.com. And yeah, please, I do want to hear about Women's Support Circle, especially because I know how important community is to people with ADHD.
Yeah.
Probably to anybody, by the way. I don't think that's unique to ADHD, but we
Yeah.
definitely we crave that connection.
And Women's Support Circle was really a colleague of mine and I, we worked together at an agency and then we went into private practice around the same time, just right around COVID time. And we decided that we had people that would reach out to us and say, we just need a place of support. We need workshops and things. And we found that we were bound by our license. We were bound by the state. We were bound by, you can't have dual relationships when you see therapy clients. And so we had former colleagues who were really struggling. We had friends and people in our lives who really just wanted some sort of community. So we created Women's Support Circle as a space to just welcome all women. We provided free lunch and learns, monthly workshops, or not monthly women's circles, and then periodic workshops. And so we had some paid events. The longer, more lengthy workshops were smaller, and we only had a limited number of guests just so it was a more private one on one experience. But those services were available outside of California too. With Women's Support Circle, it's not therapy. We're not diagnosing or treating a mental health issue. It's not specific to me working with ADHD clients. And Natalie works a lot with women. And Natalie is my colleague. She has a lot of other types of women that she works with. But we wanted to have a space where we could just invite all women and we could share a sense of community and we could share ways to navigate being a mom, being a working woman, all the different things that go along with that. And so we have an Instagram for that too. What we've been really doing is we found that a lot of our colleagues who are therapists were the ones that were really showing up to our women's circles because they didn't have a space to go. The healers didn't
Sure.
have the healers and helpers, people that we knew didn't have a space to go. And so it ended up being that we were providing this space to a lot of our colleagues and friends that needed community. And so we ended up branching out and creating what's called Therapist Night Out. So we meet every other month. It's a group of mental health professionals and therapists. We meet in person at local, typically female, women owned establishments that are small businesses. And we meet and we just network and we have fun and we talk about what we do and we share, we get to know people in person. So we know where to refer our clients if they need additional support. And so that was a branch off of Women's Support Circle. So that is a really nice creative space that Natalie and I have been able to go out to community events and do a pop up. We have a table up and share our resources. And so it's been really fun because we're not as limited like we are with our licenses.
That is awesome. Wow. This was amazing. I learned, like I said, I love this because I always learn so much and I always love hearing from someone who has ADHD who has accomplished so much because it's just we're such a good example for like ADHD is not a disorder. I loved this interview. Is there anything that I did not ask you that 'cause you walk away, you're like, I should have said that? Anything that you want to share before we close this episode?
No, I think everything, yeah, went really well. I think we covered a lot of different things. And as my former supervisor would say, we went on down a lot of little different bunny trails and jump
Mhm.
topics. That's what our brains do. And I love
Mhm.
that. So it felt like it flowed really well. And I think we covered everything that I had hoped
Great.
for.
I absolutely loved it, and I appreciate you coming forward and asking to be a guest. Thank you to everyone who listened. Please find Kara Cruz on her website to get more information about Women's Support Circle, about her wellness. And again, if you liked this episode, please subscribe and write a review, leave a review, and share it so that we can grow this community. And I am building Facebook community on Grandma Has ADHD is where you can find us. And again, we're growing, but I think you're going to see more and more people who are discovering their ADHD and want that connection. Thank you so much for listening to this and making the rest of your life the best of your life. The opinions expressed on Grandma Has ADHD podcast are those of our guests and hosts and are intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. This podcast does not provide medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The content discussed in this episode is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, mental health professional, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental health concern. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The host, guests, and producers of Grandma Has ADHD do not assume any liability for the content of this podcast. Listen at your own discretion.